Sanhedrin Daf Yomi. Don't worry, dאגה בלב איש ישחנה. The period that we're living in, the last 25 years, I'm sure it's more than that as well, but if you look at this century, it's been a century of worry so far. I was going through literally every year, there's been a major world event that has affected everybody, that has been a cause for worry. It started before the century opened. If you remember year 2K, everybody was worried that we would wake up on January the 1st, 2000, and all the computers wouldn't work, the electrical systems wouldn't work, there'll be no water, there'll be nothing. People were worried. The century came in on fear and worry. And every year there's been an issue. There was 9/11, and there was the Iraq war and ISIS, and there was the tsunami, later on the Russian war, there was the global financial crisis. Just literally all the time there's been something, and then COVID, and then October the 7th. It's just been consistently reasons for worry, and there's a lot of anxiety in the world. A lot of people are suffering a lot of anxiety, and it's understandable. There's a lot to be anxious about. But to manage worry, and we'll see that worry can be managed, we need to understand the difference between three terms. Firstly, there's yirah. Yirah is awe. And yirah is a mitzvah. We're meant to be able to appreciate awe, to experience awe, and awe guides us. It creates certain frameworks and boundaries and guidelines in which we operate, and yirah is a mitzvah. Pachad, fear, is an instinct. And pachad can bring out good in a human being, and it can bring out bad, negative in the human being. Yirah only brings out good things in a person. Pachad can bring out good and it can bring out bad, as we'll see. It depends how the instinct is used. Like all instincts can be used constructively and destructively. And then there's dאגה. Dאגה is a choice. So yirah is a mitzvah, pachad is an instinct, and dאגה, worry, is a choice. We can choose to be worried, or we can choose not to be worried. And we'll see that and through that understand our sugya. And we start right away with two psukim, both from Shlomo HaMelech, the master of therapy, of guidance, of self-help, the entire industry that exists today. Shlomo HaMelech was the master of all time. The one thing he says is, dאגה בלב איש ישחנה. If there is worry in a person's heart, yashchena, we'll see what exactly that means, and our Gemara learns it as he should remove it. So you have the opportunity to remove worry. Worry comes, you don't have necessarily the opportunity to avoid ever being worried. But the moment you identify worry in your heart, you have a mitzvah, says Shlomo HaMelech, you have an obligation to yourself of yashchena, you can get rid of it. On the other hand, Shlomo HaMelech himself says further on in the Sefer, Ashrei Adam mefachad tamid. It's good for a person to be always to be scared, to have permanent fear. What are these two ideas, and how do they interrelate? So our Gemara is actually discussing the Sefer Ben Sira, which is a Sefer, a book written by Ben Sira in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, the end of the second Beis Hamikdash, this 2nd century of the Common Era. And that Sefer was written in Hebrew, translated into many other languages, and a lot of the non-Jewish scholars of the time included it in translations of the Bible and made it one of the books of the Bible. Rav Steinsaltz does quite a lot of research on Ben Sira and how it works. And our sugya is talking about the fact that the Chazal never allowed it to be part of Tanakh. It doesn't have Kedusha. However, Steinsaltz points out, it's quoted many times in the Gemara, including on our daf many times. And we learn certain things from it. So it's not as if it's a banned book. It wasn't cancelled. The Chazal were just saying it's not part of the Torah. It's not part of Tanakh. But he goes on to show that a lot of the parts that are quoted of Ben Sira, including the part we'll focus on, are quoted in Aramaic. And Ben Sira was written in Hebrew. And he claims, probably correctly, that together with Ben Sira, there were a whole lot of perushim. People wrote explanations and essays expanding Ben Sira's philosophy. And in there, he says there's a lot of mixed stuff. There are ideas that are completely aligned with the Torah, and there are ideas that are foreign to the Torah. So that there are two things going on, that the book itself has no Kedusha, and that the Aramaic version of the expanded Ben Sira, you've also got to be careful what you use and what you reject in the Sefer. And the Gemara is going through and saying, why was the Sefer rejected as not having Kedusha, or rejected as something we shouldn't all just accept as everything in it being true? Is it because dichtiv lo tail davia belibach? It says in Ben Sira, don't allow worry in your heart. The Gavri Givrin Katal Davia, because some great human beings, some powerful people have been killed by worry. It's not a good thing. Says it's the Gemara Hashlomo Amra. So what's so bad with that? That's good advice. Shlomo says the same. Daaga belev ish yashchena. If a man has worry in his heart, he should get rid of it. How do you get rid of it? Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Yasi chadama yasichena midato. This is like from the idea of Hesech Hadat. Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yasi were learning this pasuk, and one of them said, what it means is you should remove it from your conscious mind. Yes, you've got to worry, so displace it. Focus on other things. And as you focus on other things, the worry becomes smaller and smaller. Just look at it better. I once went to the art gallery in Tel Aviv, and I got the dates wrong. There was a special impressionist exhibition I wanted to see, and I thought it started that day, and I thought that that's what they'd advertised. And I got there and it wasn't open. It wasn't available. It was the next day. So I got a little upset. I said, you've advertised it, you've got the dates wrong, you need to open it up for us. And I was getting really upset. It was my fault, not theirs, but I thought it was their fault. And an elderly docent there, was actually a doctor, came up to me and put his arm around me. This was like not that long after October the 7th. And he said, you know what, just relax. We've got bigger worries right now than whether the art gallery is open or not. Just get the perspective right of what's going on in the world, and then look at the question of whether it opens today or tomorrow in the perspective of greater things, and go downstairs. There's a nice place to have a cup of coffee and relax, and you'll feel better. And that was an important limud. Yasiach midata. Just think of the bigger things and take it away from your conscious mind. Don't focus on it. The other one of Rav Ami and Rav Asi is a deeper psychologist in a way, and says, Yasichena la'acherim. Talk about it. When fear is a thought, it's very destructive and it grows. It's like a virus. It just grows and it gets worse and worse and worse. You know what it is sometimes in the nighttime where you can't do anything about it. You start worrying about something. The worry gets worse and worse and the fears get bigger and bigger. It has a life of its own. That's why it's a thought. Don't take it away from being a thought and give it form. The way you give it form is by talking to somebody else about it. And nowadays people use journaling as one of the ways. Write it down, write out what you're worried about. And now it's no longer a thought. Once you've said it or you've written it, it stops growing and it's contained, and then you can deal with it and it kind of dissipates. Those are the two ideas. But you see clearly that worry is not something we should embrace. We should identify. You've got to know, I'm worried. And you should then be able to take that worry and talk about it or focus on something else so that you can remove it from your conscious mind. And we see this in other areas. If we go back to a Matmonim we did on Kiddushin Daf Chav Daled, there I brought you the Rambam, where the Rambam in Hilchos Melachim, in the laws of Milchama, talks about Kol HaMatchil Lachshov Ulaharher B'Milchama. When a person is in battle and he starts thinking of the war and he starts getting nervous and worried, Umavhil Atzmo, and he causes himself to be scared. Over below ta'aseh, that's an isur of the Torah, that's a prohibition of the Torah. To cause yourself to become scared. So fear is also a choice. Fear is something, not only is worry a choice, but fear is a choice. And one brings it upon oneself. Mavhil atzmo. Rabbeinu Bechaya and the Kadakemach, the two Rabbeinu Bechayas, the one wrote the Perush on the Chumash, and he wrote Kadakemach. He was a Talmud of the Rashbo in the 14th century. And then there was a much earlier Rabbeinu Bechaya who wrote the Chovas Halvovos. That was in the 11th century, much earlier. So one mustn't get the two confused. This is the later Rabbeinu Bechaya. We call him Rabbeinu Bechaya. The Sfardim call him Rabbeinu Bachya. And now because Sfarim are printed with Nekudot and they often put the Sfardi pronunciation, it's become common to call him Rabbeinu Bachya. But we grew up with Rabbeinu Bechaya. I never heard of Rabbeinu Bachya until I came to Israel. But both, of course, are correct. We don't know exactly how to pronounce it. And in the Kadakemach, which is a beautiful sefer where he takes different ideas and writes an essay on each idea and lists them alphabetically, on Bitochen, he says that Bischara Bitachon Afa Pishaita Hatzara Ru'ya Lavo Alav. If you have Bitochen, if you trust in Hashem, and that's the way to get worry out of your mind, even that which you worried about, which maybe ought to have happened, will not happen because you've diverted your attention to bitachon, and Hashem responds. And the Beis Halevi says in a beautiful sefer that he wrote on bitachon, which has now become popular again because it's been written, published with a very nice perush. he talks about this, that fear itself, gorem lo she'yinaten lefanav mokesh shelo haya klal mikodem b'oto davar. Rabbeinu Bechaya says, even though you should have, what you're worried about should happen to you, it won't because of your trust in Hashem. The Beis Halevi turns it the other way and says, if you have fear, it will bring about exactly what you're afraid of. And that was the topic of the Matmonim on Kiddushin Daf Kaf Daled, how fear brings upon us the very things we're afraid of. So not only doesn't it help to be afraid, it actually attracts the negativity of which you're afraid. And that's based on the Gemara there in Kiddushin, where the Gemara is talking about if you make a noise and that causes a person to get a shock, and from the shock he loses his hearing or his eyesight temporarily. Shani Adam, Dikivan de Bardatu Ihu Mavit Nafshe. Here's the makor for the Rambam's idea. A human being has to be responsible for his own fear. You can't blame somebody else and say, he scared me, he shocked me. You chose to be shocked. It's true, the Gemara says there that it's a groma and it's chayiv b'din hashemayim. The other person was responsible for doing something that caused this one to get shocked. But you are still responsible. We are responsible for our own fear. You can't say, why are you anxious? I'm anxious because of October the 7th. I'm anxious because my business is failing. There's no because. I'm anxious because I've chosen to be anxious. And the moment you use those words, you gain mastery over anxiety. I'm anxious. Yes, I'm anxious. I acknowledge it. I'm anxious. My heart's palpitating. My chest is tight. I've got headaches. I can't sleep at night. I'm anxious. Why are you anxious? The answer is because I've chosen to be anxious. That's a very liberating answer to be able to say. And Ihu Mavit Nafshe, and Rashi says, because a person is a badat shenoten libo el pachad kol haba pitom. He applies his mind to the source of the fear. Whereas you could apply your mind to something else and dissipate the source of the fear. So we see that this is something we can control. On the other hand, we have this idea of Ashrei Adam Mefached Tamid. A person should always be scared. What does that mean? And we have the Gemara in Brochus, where there was a Talmud who was walking behind Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yosef, and he saw that he was afraid. This Talmud was afraid. Omar, he said to him, the only people who have to be afraid are people who have done something wrong. You know, if you're walking through customs at the airport, if you've got something you shouldn't have, you should be a little scared. And they're trained to look out and notice who is and who isn't scared. But if you've got nothing to be worried about, you go through normally. They'll stop you, so they'll stop you. What do you care? If you're afraid there's something wrong, you've got something to be afraid of. So they say to this Talmud, are you afraid? Are you a chato? Are you a sinner? No, he just says, I'm a tzaddik, I'm a Baal Musa. There's a pasuk that says one should always be afraid, so I'm afraid. Why are you accusing me of being a sinner? How b'divrei Torah ksiv? You've got to be afraid of your Torah, which links into our shiur yesterday, how difficult it is to make Torah one's own. How much effort and investment is needed for Torah to be something that actually changes who you are, transforms who you are. What you need to invest for that to happen. Just to learn some information, that's easy. To read through Torah, that's easy. To listen to shiurim jacuzzi style is easy. But if you're going to invest, if you're going to immerse and go for a swim against the current, and that's going to make you much stronger, how do you do that? What is that? There's a lot of work involved. And you can forget it easily, as we'll see in the Maharal. And that's what you need to be afraid of. Do I really understand the Torah? Is this understanding, is this insight really correct? Is my chidush really true? Am I going to remember this? Can I remember this? What am I going to do not to forget it? That's the kind of pachad we're talking about that. Says Rashi, Shemitoch kachu marzil l'shanotam tamid. Rashi's answering an interesting question. How did Rabbi Yishmael bar Rabbi Yossi know that this Talmud wasn't worried about his Torah? All you could see that he was worried. He was anxious. Maybe he was anxious about Torah. No, says Rashi. If you're anxious about Torah, what do? You don't sit and sitter. If you're anxious about Torah, you open your Gemara and you do Chazorah. You do some revision. You look at it once again. You revise it in your mind. So fear is an instinct designed to activate us and protect us from negativity, to protect us from danger. So we run because we're afraid. We hide because we're afraid. Fear is an animal instinct that we have which triggers a system within us, an involuntary nervous system within us that causes us to protect ourselves and survive. That's what fear is for. And even in Torah we have it. There's the fear of losing one's Torah. And that fear of losing one's Torah drives us to take action. So if fear drives you to take action, that's fine. The stock market's falling and you're afraid. So take action, do something, sell, make a decision, then finish. Then it's done. You do what you need to do. You can't sit and have fear all the time. If fear drives to action, it's positive. And in Gittin and the Kamta, there's also the Ashrei Adam B'fached Tamid, where Rashi says you've got to be concerned of second-order consequences and third-order consequences. That's the Ashrei Adam B'fached Tamid. Always be aware of what could be the outcome of what I'm doing. And that's different, says Tosfos there, from Adam HaMitpached B'chinam, somebody who's just afraid for no real reason. If you have reason to be afraid, act on your fear. Once you've acted, calm down. If you can't act on the fear, then what are you? Then it's anxiety. Then it's worry. That's a choice. You don't have to worry. There are ways to remove the worry, either by talking to somebody else about it and taking it out of your head and into reality, or writing it down, or by focusing on something different so that the perspective is gained, and what you're worried about is relatively small in the bigger picture of things. And then in the Sivas Olam, the Maharal Miprag explains why with Divrei Torah one has to be afraid. And he says because Divrei Torah are not naturally human. The Torah is not a human science or a human art. It's not something a human being created that we can master it that easily. Other forms of knowledge you can master. You've got to study a bit, you've got to read a bit, you've got to remember what you've done. You can master it. It can be done. But to really master Torah, to get to the source of Torah, to get to the essence of Torah, to get to the neshama of Torah, you're talking about a spiritual link that is not something that is natural for us. We need a supernatural investment of effort in Torah to connect with the Torah at a deep level so that the Torah can impact us and we in turn can really understand it fully. There was an exhibition that I saw, an art exhibition in New York the other day by a man called David Caspar Friedberg, was an artist in the 19th century, I think, a German artist. And there was a little piece that he wrote, and he said, the purpose of a landscape artist is not just to take a picture of the landscape and then give it to people. That's not what it is. It's to connect spiritually with the landscape, absorb it into your essence as the artist, and then give the world what's in your essence, what you've absorbed. That's the combination of the landscape and yourself, to give what's in you. And Lavdil, it's the same with Torah. The idea of Torah, and we talked about Lalame, to teach yesterday, is not just to take something that you've learned and spit it out and now it's taught, and to take something and quote it and now it's quoted. It's to absorb it into your soul and to integrate it and digest it, and then to teach that which you've digested, that which you've integrated, so that there is that integrated worldview that we spoke about yesterday. And that, says the Maharal, is not something that comes naturally, and since it doesn't come naturally, it can go easily. And that's the pachad. Am I able to get it, and am I able to keep it? And each one of us, that doesn't mean that this is beyond any of us. The fact that it's not natural isn't beyond it. We are human beings. Human beings are supernatural. Human beings aren't natural. Animals are natural. Human beings are supernatural. We do supernatural things all the time. Our creativity is supernatural. The power of speech is supernatural. To daven to Hashem is supernatural. To learn Torah is supernatural. We do it all the time. We've just got to be aware that it's supernatural. And we've got to use all of our efforts and all of our energy to engage in Torah and to be worried and concerned. That's a valid anxiety. Have I understood the Torah right? I don't understand the Tosfos. That's a good anxiety. Why didn't you sleep last night? I didn't understand the Tosfos. Oh, that's a good reason not to sleep. Why didn't you sleep last night? I'm worried about the war in Gaza. It's not your business, the war in Gaza. The Rebbeinu Shlom's running that. What are you worried about the war in Gaza? Look at bigger things. That you can control, because just as Yirah is a mitzvah and Yirah brings out the best in us, awe is a wonderful thing. Worry is not. Fear is an instinct, and it can be good and it can be bad. We need to be aware of the fact that we're afraid, and we need to understand we have fear and use the fear for the right things we can do something about, particularly in the area of Torah. But anxiety, worry means I'm worrying about things I can do nothing about. To worry about things that we can do nothing about is not something positive, as our Gemara learns. What we've got to do is yashchena. We've got to take this away, either by focusing on the bigger things and getting perspective, or through yasichena, speaking about it or writing about it, so that we take it out of our imagination and it becomes something real that we can deal with.